Brother Judd has said, we're just so glad you're here. Delighted to be together today and thankful for God's providence that allows it to be so. And looking forward to the opportunities that the Lord's Day will bring. And invite you to turn in your Bible to the 78th Psalm. We'll begin there in just a moment as the springboard, I guess, for our lesson today. I want to think with you about something that is very much relatable to the congregation here. I'm not sorry at all that visitors are with us. I'm glad that you're here too. I don't think these things are exclusive to this congregation or any one congregation, but maybe they're things that will be of special use to us in some way as we try to reinforce good habits. The 78th Psalm is one of those historical psalms, I guess we could call it. It's a psalm that does go back through history. It's a psalm that speaks to the story of Israel. And as you look through or remember this 78th psalm, he talks about events that take place during the Judges. He talks about things that take place during the Exodus from Egypt and the wandering in the wilderness and God's care for his people. And he talks about even things that relate to the time of Eli and the time of David. But one of the things that comes through in this psalm is the fact that though God had been so good to Israel in so many ways for so long, they had forgotten him, quickly, easily forgotten him. They turned back, verse 41 reads, they turned back and tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. And they remembered not his hand, nor the day when he delivered them from the enemy. So when Asaph begins this psalm, he begins this way, back in verse 1. He writes, "Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable, and I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us." Let me pause there to say, I think his point is that the things that I'm telling you are history that should be well known, and they're things that have the effect of a parable, of a paradigm, teaching generations to come about God and how we ought to have that relation with God. He writes in verse 4, talking about these great things that God has done through history. "We will not hide them from their children, showing to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength and his wonderful works that he hath done. For he established a testimony in Jacob, and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children, that they might set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and not be as their fathers, stubborn, rebellious generation, a generation that set not their heart aright, and whose spirit was not steadfast with God." Well, I think all of us could say amen to that. That's what we wanted it. And I think in part that's the work of this church. Now, I'm not saying exclusively so. I want to make the point. You know, when it comes to teaching God to children, the primary work is done in the home. We recognize that to be so. But when it comes to this congregation, I think we are right in making the opportunity and in putting into the budget of this church efforts to try to teach classes not only of adults but also those that are younger. You know, that has been through the years, at least in some quarters, a matter of controversy. When I was first trying to learn how to preach, and I'm still working on it, but I was up in West Virginia, and the arrangement was that I was working with this congregation of pretty good size. They had a fellow there who was preaching there regularly, and my job was to study with him through the week, and they gave me an opportunity to teach there once a month, and the rest of the month on Sundays I'd be out, different churches and appointment preaching, we called it. And one place that I became familiar with was a church well out in the country. It's still the only church that I think I have ever been connected with that didn't have indoor plumbing. It had an outhouse, which, by the way, is okay. It's not as pleasant, but, if you're as old as me, I guarantee your grandparents had an outhouse, at least for part of their life. And you don't have to go back very far. All of our necessities were really conveniences and dreams come true. But anyway, it's a good group of folks in some ways, but they had some quirky ideas about some things. And one thing that I noticed when I started visiting with them was that it seemed like they had, I don't know much about bowling, is it a 7-10 split? Is that what they call it when you get the pins on both sides of the, and you had the grandparents and you had the grandchildren. And everybody in between seemed like they were just gone, lost, a whole lost generation of people. And I got to talking to some of the folks there that I really appreciated, and they said, I said, we lost a whole generation of kids. And they felt like, the people I was talking to, seemed to be the most dedicated people, they said, I think one thing that contributed to that, one thing was that during that period of time, the church decided we don't need Bible classes. We don't need those, teaching children, again, that was a matter of controversy in some areas, and it was here. But when their grandchildren started going, then it was easier to try to convince them, look, we really need to do all that we can to encourage the knowledge of God in this young generation. So the fellows reluctantly agreed to have Bible classes. It was a small group. They just had 2 classrooms, just 2 classes of younger people. And even in those classes, it was a pretty wide split. Anyway, one little thing that went with that was that while they agreed, the fellows as a whole, they didn't have elders, they agreed to have classes, they still didn't want women teaching any of the classes, even the kids, which has also been an idea that some brethren have advocated through the years. I think it is incorrect. But here's the other part of that was, the other shoe that dropped was, we don't want the women teaching the classes, but none of the men were willing to teach the classes. So what do? Well, there was one guy, one family. They didn't even have children. They were just as good of folks as you'll meet. You would love them if you met them. And Roger said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll teach the class. Problem was, he had 2 classes. So what I observed was that Roger would teach 2 classes at the same time. Now, that's not easy. I guess if you had a one-room schoolhouse like in the old days, maybe that's not so unheard of, but I thought it was strange. But they had these 2 rooms, and so what Roger would do was he'd give them both an assignment. And they'd be working on that, and while this group was working on that, he'd come in here and teach this for a while, give them another assignment. Then he'd go back over to this classroom, trying to work with brethren's consciences, but also trying very desperately and very intently to do all that he could to instill a love of God's Word and a knowledge of the history of God into young people that desperately needed it. I really have thought about that through the years, and I very much appreciate it. There is an importance, I think, to the classes that we have, the adult class and all the rest. And when it comes to the children's classes, I've never heard anybody here express this, let me be clear. But I have been at places or heard good people who have said things along the lines of, well, I think those little ones, they don't get much out of that anyway. They're just so young. And I think that's a very unwise statement and misguided. Far be it for me to brag on my grandkids. But, I was, every night, we'd put Gabriel and Samuel to bed, Joe and Laurie would. And their short visit here, those are my grandchildren. And Sam is 2 years old. And one of the things they would do is they would go over the 17 periods of Bible history. Now, where they are, and we may do it here, I really am too ignorant to know, but they had little hand gestures that went along with the, the history of the early church, or the captivity, or different things like that. And a little 2-year-old that his talking is getting better, but he knew every one of those. He could express every one of those. Little ones can learn, and teaching them is important. I don't think anybody here would fight with me about that. I think you know that at least as well as I do. I'm not suggesting, again, that the Bible classes that we have, for example, for our young people, are the primary or the only teaching that is to be done. If so, then something bad is missing here. I think the home has many more opportunities to teach. Let me just say a word about that. There's some questions that come up sometimes, and good questions about, you have, for example, a young man. He's obeyed the gospel, and he is an adolescent in some ways, a young man in other ways. And, and good conscientious moms are maybe concerned about, well, how far do I press it? Well, you're still his mom. You understand that. But I do appreciate the point. She may decide that even while he's still at home, I don't feel comfortable leading a prayer, and I don't feel comfortable. So I understand the question. But having said that, I'll tell you, there's going to be plenty of time. She's going to be able to sit down and talk about spiritual things with her children, male and female, and reason with them and plead with them and show them. But, the dads have got to have that role as well. And I'm thankful for the godly fathers here who take that seriously. And I've met through the years people, fathers or mothers, whoever it might be, who feel a little bit behind about that. They don't feel like maybe they know enough. But these are our children. And so I tell you what they do. They just do what they can. They teach what they know. They grow in their knowledge. And as they work to teach and to talk to their children about spiritual things, not just when they're sitting around the table at a certain designated time, it may be when they're on a fishing trip, or it may be when they're on the hunting trip, or it may be when they're on something else, and they're just talking to them about the Bible, and children may ask a question they don't know the answer to. That's okay. You go find an answer. That's a part of growth. But they look at their father and their mother as a source of Bible knowledge, and as people who are interested in spiritual questions. And sometimes people think, man, I should have done this when they were a year old, or 2 years old, 3. Well, we can't go back in a time machine. We just start where we are. And we just start today, and we do what we can, and we grow, because we know how important it is. So I'm not in any way diminishing the work you're doing there when I talk about the classes. I am simply saying that we ought to use the classes as a help in that regard. Recently, at this congregation particularly, there were some questions, good questions about, how we should proceed with the future in terms of our Bible classes. And that's a good question. It's not bad to ask the question. There are different ways to do it. We have for a number of years in the auditorium class, for example, and then a quarter later in our younger classes, we have been involved in a survey of the Bible story. It occurs to me that Psalm 78 is not a lot different than that. It's just more condensed. It's not a bad thing to survey the Bible story for the very reason that the psalmist talked about. Because we want to have before our minds and the minds of our children the greatness of God. That the Bible is one story, 40 different men over a period of 1,400 years. It's the same story. It's the greatness and love and purity of God, and that's a good thing. And that can do a lot of good. Somebody else says, well, I like textual studies. I do too. When we get into a book of the Bible and we begin to look at this book first from the standpoint of what the book overall is about, and then parse the words and think about the arguments and the reasoning and the thing, that's a good thing. Somebody else says, I like a topical study. I do too. Where we'll take a topic and just look at all the passages that we can, or maybe at least a number of them, maybe all of us a little bit ambitious, but that's sort of like what Paul did over in Romans 15, isn't it? He was talking over in Romans 15 about, well, the book of Romans is so much about the question of the Jew and the Gentile, and is there a different road to salvation for one or the other? Can a Gentile just be a Christian without becoming a Jew first? That old question that had troubled the churches of Galatia, Paul was warning the Roman church about. And you read in the last part of Romans 15, and what Paul does is he goes to the Psalms and he goes to the law, and he says, have you considered this verse? Have you thought about this passage? That's Paul dealing with a subject and going from one verse to another from the Old Testament to show that the Gentiles have always been a part of God's plan. So I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think there's a wrong answer when it comes to how you approach. And I've admitted, and this is just my thinking, I'd love to think that we could have all those going at one time. We had it one time here, space is, not having enough space suggests some good things. I visit churches sometimes, they've got a whole wing full of classrooms they don't use. That's sad. But it's nice to have that. If you got enough people and you got enough space to have a class that's going over the survey and a class that may be studying the Romans in depth and a class over here that may be dealing with other issues, that's great. But again, just for me, when I think about these kinds of questions, and they are important questions and they are good to ask, how should we go? What should we do? I think about a wise old preacher one time said something in my presence that stuck with me. And he was talking about preachers. And he said, a preacher, young man, he wrestles with the question, where do I need to go? Maybe he has an opportunity to work with this church, or maybe somebody says, you need to go overseas. And somebody else says, well, you need to go north, or you need to go south, or you need to go. And, things like that, sounds flippant to say it'll drive you nuts, but, it is a hard thing. Because the truth is you don't ever really know. If you make a move over here, whatever happens over here, you never really know what would happen if you stayed. And if you stay, you never know what will happen if you went. But the old guy made this point, and maybe this has an application for all of us in this regard. He said, I'm not sure that it makes that much difference where you are when you're working for the Lord. The question is what you're doing where you are. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I'm not saying it's unimportant. And I'm not saying it's unimportant what we study in our adult class or our children's class. I think it's very important. But I think it makes more a difference. Not so much the approach that we take, but how we work it. And how we, the old cliche, you'll forgive me for using it again, but I can't think of a better way to say it. And you know it's true as well as I do. The more we put into it, the more we get out of it. And if we're working the survey, or if we're a topical class, or the more we put into it, the more we'll get out of it. And the same is true with our children. So let me, in the time that I have left, look at the question about how can we get the most out of our Bible classes by talking just a word about our teachers and a word about our students. And we're all both those at one point or another, likely. So what about teachers, making the most of our Bible classes as teachers? Well, one thing obviously we'd all agree on is it takes study and preparation in order to do that. And let me take this opportunity to say to all of our teachers, whatever class, here you are, you working 40, 50 hours a week somewhere, someplace, and yet, you make some time somewhere in that week. You can't do it while you're working your job. Maybe you can be thinking about it if you're meditating on things, if your job doesn't require immediate attention every second. But really, you're going to have to at some point put aside recreation time or sleep time or something else. Can't neglect your family. But you can't neglect this either. And the folks that do that and do so well at it here, I marvel and I am grateful from the bottom of my heart for the good work that you do, the men and women here. And I think it's essential to having a good class. The goal of this instruction is love that flows from a pure heart from a clear conscience, from a sincere truth. That's the kind of teacher God can use. Paul writes to Timothy. Some people have left these qualities behind and have turned to fruitless discussion. They want to be teachers of the law. They don't know what they're talking about. And what they are saying, they don't understand what they're affirming. They don't know. But they want to be teachers, but they don't know. Sometimes we don't know. And I'll say again, let me think about that. It's not a bad answer. A lot better answer than me just guessing at it and trying to answer a question I don't know the answer to. Nobody knows everything. And hopefully, you and I will be able to say, after you ask me the first time and I'm hit with it, I'll try to have a better answer the next time that question comes along. But teachers take this not because they know everything, but as an opportunity to grow. And every person here, whatever class you're teaching, you approach that class with the idea in mind that I need to be ready for whichever way this goes and to do our best to try to find the questions. That's a lot of what teaching is. If I've never taught 1 Timothy before, or I've never taught Acts before, one of the best things I'll get out of that is just finding some of the questions. Because I don't know what I don't know. But as I get into the text, questions that I have, I'll find an answer for them. I'll just have to admit right now, I'm not sure what I'd say about that if somebody asked me. An opportunity to grow. Never will grow if I don't face that. But when I say something, I need to know what I'm talking about, and that's what good teachers do. They study and prepare that they might know what they are saying. Something else that I think is essential in this matter is setting clear-cut goals. That is, every class that you and I take, we know where we're starting and where we're finishing and what we're expected to get done in the meantime. Let's just take, for example, what we're doing now with the survey. You know, it's a really valuable thing to leave people with a clear overview of the Bible, an understanding of the Bible as one book. I have an idea, and I don't think you disagree with me. Most people that we talk to in the religious world, they don't know that that's so. They don't have any idea. They're people that don't even know their two testaments. And so, you know, because there's just this really basic lack of knowledge about the Bible, it can be very good for us having a clear-cut understanding to take someone and to take them through the Bible story in an abbreviated way. And lists are very valuable in that regard. As we're teaching the survey to emphasize the periods of Bible history, to emphasize the generations, to emphasize the 12 tribes, to emphasize whatever it might be, the plagues, to have those lists in our mind, to teach them to those children so that they can just rattle them off like you ask them what their name was. It takes time. There's regression. Constant reminder helps. But as a teacher, that's what I'm taking on, is the realization my job is to give them a clear view of the whole story. And in particular, whatever quarter I'm covering, to give them a clear view of what's happening, where the thing is moving to, who's involved, where they're going. That's what we want to do. Our goal is to leave the students with a clear view of not only the timeline, but every one of the 66 books of the Bible. One of the things that should be true about those who have been involved with this survey is that the students, when they leave, ought to be able to tell you, this is what Nahum is about. This is what the Psalms are about. This is what Exodus is about. This is where it fits in the story. This is what Titus is about. That doesn't mean I know every answer to every question somebody could ask, but I know how the Bible fits together. Now, something like we're doing, that's what we're trying to do. That's our accomplishment. That's our goal. Have we done that? Would be a good question for me as a teacher. Somebody sitting in my class, if they've gotten a clear view, now they don't have to take it, of course. I can just sit there like a rock and you can do the best job in the world and I'm not getting it, I'm not listening. But I'm talking about the teacher right now. Have I laid it out in a clear fashion? This is what we want to do. This is what we need to know. I'll never likely get there if I don't have a very clear goal in mind. And of course, as teachers, we're doing this segment by segment. So that my job is to take from point A to point B, my job is to talk about the period of the Judges or the period of the Genesis, and to leave people with a clear view of what that's about. Let me mention a couple of other things. Time management is also critically important in this. It's important because we have organized our study into a 3.5-year study. There's nothing magical about 3.5 years. Brother Walden explained it a long time ago. He said, you could slow down and you could make it a 7-year study, but there might be some folks that died between the start and the finish. He said, you'd like to be able to keep a study well, it can't be so condensed that nobody gets anything out of it, but hopefully it's in such a time frame that people were there at the start and there at the finish, and they can remember. People will be coming in and out, of course, but the idea is that you, in a reasonable period of time, are going through the Scriptures nose to tail, as the old guy said. Generations and revolutions, as the guy said. So that's the idea. Now, my job as a teacher is to know I'm starting here and I'm given the responsibility to cover this much material. Now, what will happen as teachers, and everybody here that's taught knows this, and students know this too, there are interruptions. There are things that happen. Maybe we're going to have a meeting. That's a great thing. But maybe it'll take a class out of the rotation. So there's never been, I guess, a quarter that didn't have some interruption. My job as a teacher is to adjust and to make sure that we get the overall point taught. And it's important because I don't want to leave anything, just whole sections out of this survey, because that's the point. We're trying to give them a view of the whole Bible. And that job, it seems to me, falls on me as a teacher. And I'll tell you, I don't always do great with that. But I know that's my job. And also to know our audience. One of the things I admire so much about the women here, the ladies here, who teach the younger classes, I've said this before, maybe not often enough, I think their job is just as hard as those of us who might teach the adult class. They're not going to get into the depth. I doubt any of our little children are going to stand up and ask them, now, tell me exactly what was meant when Jude said that Michael disputed with the devil about the body of Moses. I don't think that's likely the question you're going to get in that class. Might surprise me. But there is a real talent involved in taking these books and breaking them down into worthwhile lessons that can be understood on this level and then teaching them. Maybe you've heard of these places, maybe you've seen some of these places where basically it's just more a matter of teachers that just sort of put blocks in the floor and keep them from killing each other until, the time for the buzzer to ring. That's not the way the ladies here handle classes like that. They have in mind teaching children and leaving lessons, and even if they don't fully understand what the words mean, they've heard the words, and the words are in their mind and their heart. Anyway, appreciate so much that work. And I think the Lord, He had a way, didn't He? As He taught, He would take people where they were, and He would leave them closer to God. Can't teach somebody up here that's right here. And it's frustrating sometimes to teach people up here and teach them down here. But one of the things that a good teacher has to do is know their audience. Now, quickly, let me make a mention about some of the basic things, reminders for those of us who are students. As students, if we're going to get the most out of our classes, whatever format they have, whatever they are, we need to be present. It's extremely important to be here. I've told the students this before, and I'm not ashamed to say it when I have the privilege of teaching the young people here, and I'll say it to you. We're blessed to have some really sharp kids. These are kids that are honor students. These are kids that are bright kids, a whole lot smarter than I was when I was their age. And the parents, because they're good parents, are serious about academics too, by the way. And they want their children to have a good education. They want them to learn. But we always have got to have a greater priority on their spiritual education, even than the secular education. I'm not against secular education. But, and people are going to be out of town. They're going to leave. They're going to miss classes. I understand that. I'm just saying, if our honor student misses 3 chemistry classes in a row, we're going to be trying to find some way to catch up, And I think we bring that same mentality when it comes to our classes. That they're missing something every time they're not there. We need to make sure that in some form or fashion. It's easier to do, for example, if we're out here, we have the YouTube. You can go back and listen to the lesson that the teacher has taught. But if not, we can go back through the material and we can read that material and we may bring the next class some questions that we have about it. But that's the mentality we bring. This is important. We need to be present. We need to make sure that we know what we're studying, and that if we miss something, that we do our best to try not to miss it, but to catch up with it. I think it's also important to be on time. Let me be clear. I'm not here to tell you that it's a sin to be late for church. I've thought about it, and I'm sure you have too. In ancient times, before they had a Timex or a cell phone with an alarm or whatever, it wouldn't surprise me if there were a lot of times when the saints just sort of waited till they were sure everybody that was coming showed up. And then they started. So maybe it's our society that puts more emphasis on the clock than ancient societies did. But I'm just saying that the way we have it arranged, we have, let's just take the kids' class as an example. We have a 45-minute class on Sunday, a 45-minute class on Wednesday. As I said, they're getting other things other places, but that's what they're getting here. And let's just say, not on an emergency basis, not on some kind of crazy thing, but just on a regular basis, the kids are missing 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes of that time. Well, you can see how that would affect things. You can see what they're missing. Again, let me put it in terms of secular education. I don't know how many periods. They used to have 7 periods when I was in school. And, based on percentages, there's no way you're going to let your honor student miss 3 periods every day and just think, well, that's nothing to that. You'd be very concerned if you found out they were missing 3 periods a day, because that has an importance. This has an importance as well. One thing, and this may be more with me than other people, I don't know, but it really discombobulates me when I'm late. It throws me off. I have to work to get my mind back around. I'm usually a bit frazzled because I hate to be late. And so that's a factor as well. And then everybody else looking at me saying, why is he late? And the poor teacher's up there trying his best to tell people about the crucifixion of Christ, and it's not getting done. So there's a better way to do it. And, I remember a family in West Virginia. This particular family lived in Barbersville. You don't know necessarily where, not many people know where that is in this room, but Barbersville is about 45 minutes from the building in Charleston, one way. Sometimes I'd be running behind. I never saw that family be late. They drove 45 minutes one way. They were always there on time. And they always made me feel ashamed when I was late. It's just a question of the priorities, and we think this is important, and the time is important, and the focus is important. And nobody here, I think, disagrees with that. So we just want to be consistent with that. Let me mention another thing quickly. Had a lot of stuff on that. Now, preparing. Knowing the lesson. Being ready to start off running. I've heard Brother Bradley make the point, and I think it's a good one. When we note the music properly, we don't have to wait for the song leader to sing 3 words. We can just start with him on the 2nd stanza, the 3rd stanza. Not a word is lost. That's a good point. I'd love it to be that way with our Bible classes. I'm here, I'm ready, I know where we're starting, I know what we're going to talk about, or at least basically. And I mean, from word 1, I'm engaged with this because I'm prepared. Part of that preparation may involve physical things. I think of poor old Eutychus. You know, he was the fellow that fell out of the window. They took him up for dead in Acts 20. I don't know what kind of troubles he had had. He might have been a slave working all day for somebody else and just exhausted. But I'm not a slave in that sense. We're all slaves of Christ, but we're not slaves in that sense. So the Lord's Day has an importance to it. And I don't want to be doing anything that's going to make me so exhausted that I can't concentrate on what we're doing right now. Not just the class, taking the Lord's Supper and singing together, meaning every word that Rodney, whoever it is, leads us in. You know, that's important, and we all know that, but it's easy to let these things slip. And so coming prepared, physically and mentally, to be getting everything out of this opportunity, because that's what we are about. Coming with purpose. Coming with purpose. Teacher's job is to teach and prepare and to do the best he can, and my job is to listen and to learn. You know, I'm sure I'm not alone in this. Every teacher maybe doesn't strike me the same way. I go to a meeting somewhere. I may not know the man who's preaching, and sometimes I'll think, wow, he's so effective in reaching me. And then some folks, maybe I don't like their style. Maybe there's something about them that's off-putting to me. But here's what I've got to do. I've got to be grown up enough to say, if I'm going to sit for an hour or more, whatever it is, in a chair like that, among God's people, I intend to get the most out of this opportunity. Not to spite somebody, but for the sake that it's important. And even if the fellow is not the speaker that maybe I enjoy the most, or the teacher I enjoy the most, or the song leader I enjoy the most, I am determined that I'm going to, after I finish this song, be closer to God. After the guy quits teaching, I'm going to either learn something I did not know before, or I'm going to be reinforced in something that's important that I did know. I doubt if I asked for a show of hands if anybody would say, I don't agree with that. Everybody agrees with that. So I got to put it into practice. Every time, every class, every assembly, every opportunity. To take the job of teaching and listening, student and teacher, with the utmost of seriousness. Redeem the time. For all I know, this may be my last assembly. For all I know, this may be my last Lord's Day. None of us know those things. What we do know is what we're doing is important. That's why you're here. The classes are important. That's why you put your children in them. That's why you agree to teach them. And I would just leave us with this simple thing, that whatever we do and whatever we choose to do, work it to the utmost of our ability. Whatever style or whatever choice the church here might make, I don't think there's so many wrong answers there. I think the wrong can come in, the failure can come in, if I don't teach it and study it as I should. Okay. Thanks so much for listening to that, and I hope you take that with the respect that I have and the spirit that I intend it to be taken. If you're here this morning and you're not a child of God, the great God, the almighty God, the God of the Bible, the God who spoke to Moses, the God who called Abraham, the God who sent his own son to die on the cross for us, the same God calls you to be his own. And I think with the weight of all that history over us, of that perspective on us, we ought to recognize, what can I do but say yes? How can I say no? Come in penitence. Come in faith that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Come and be baptized into Christ for the remission of sins, raised to walk in newness of life. Why not today make that your choice? If you're here as one who, as a child of God, has not been faithful to that promise you made some time ago, why not today make that right with him? Maybe we can help you in some way. If so, let us know how as we stand and sing. Will you?